I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. All right, let's talk about the State of the Union last night. Last night, Donald Trump delivered the best State of the Union in American history. Also, last night, Donald Trump delivered the longest State of the Union speech in American history 1 hour and 48 minutes, nearly 2 full hours. 2 hours. Because when everything in the country is running perfectly, what we really need is more talking. And according to the president, folks, we are living in absolute economic paradise. We're winning. We're winning so much it hurts. We're thriving. Everyone is prosperous. Jobs are everywhere. Paychecks are soaring. Groceries are apparently affordable again. Buying a home? Easy. Buying a car? No problem. The American dream, if you listened last night, is basically back on clearance at Costco. The whole country is doing wonderful. Everything is fantastic. We're in the golden age. Everybody's doing great. I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I'm doing great. Do you feel like you're doing great? Because a lot of Americans listening last night to the president's speech were probably looking at their grocery bill, their rent, their credit card balance, and thinking, what country is Trump talking about? It was a glowing, polished, made for television portrait of a country that, and I say this gently, a whole lot of Americans would very much like to meet. Because if you've been to an actual grocery store recently, if you've looked at an actual housing payment recently, if you've opened an actual credit card bill recently, you might have experienced what professionals in the technical field call a slightly different reality. The other thing I was unaware of until Trump pointed this out last night, it was that apparently all the negatives that's been happening in this country in the last 4 years was my fault. Me, a Democrat, along with all the other Democrats that caused this mess in America. Inflation, the high cost of living, fraud, plus more. Democrats are apparently also to blame. Pay attention now. We're also to blame for wanting Social Security and Medicare to be destroyed. And yes, if you heard Trump say that line last night, you must have either choked or laughed so hard you peed in your pants. You know, I was half expecting Donald Trump to say the reason why the New England Patriots lost in the Super Bowl was because of the Democrats. All of the comments last night from Donald Trump were hilarious if they weren't so absurd. And 99% of Trump's statements were blatant lies. And that brings us to what last night's speech really was. Not a State of the Union, a state of the spin. Trump opened by essentially declaring the economy a roaring success story. Inflation is down. Wages are up. America is back. Da 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 da. Hakuna Matata. Now let's be fair. Inflation has cooled from its peak. That part is real. But here's the part that didn't quite make the highlight reel. Prices are still way higher than they were a few years ago. So yes, inflation slowed, but the grocery bill didn't magically rewind itself like a Netflix show. Americans don't experience the economy in percentages. They experience it at the checkout line. and millions of people are still feeling squeezed. But in Donald's speech, smooth sailing. And then Trump doubled down on tariffs. Not just the usual tough talk. He actually floated the idea that tariffs could replace the income tax. Replace it. Which sounds fantastic right until you spend about 10 seconds doing the math. Because tariffs don't come out of thin air and they don't get paid by some mystery country fairy. They work their way through the system and very often land right back on American businesses and American consumers. So the idea that you can just swap out the income tax with tariffs and everybody rides off into the sunset, that's a beautiful soundbite. It's also some extremely heavy lifting in the reality department. Then we got the familiar energy message. More drilling. Drill, baby, drill, Trump said. More production. America dominating fossil fuels. Now, politically, this plays well with part of the country. No surprise there. But what was noticeably missing? Any serious discussion of climate risk. Any acknowledgement of extreme weather costs. Any mention of energy markets and utility bills. And as Trump's speech rolled on, we got what might be my personal favorite Washington tradition, the health care promise that floats in, waves politely, and then leaves without leaving a forwarding address. The president talked broadly about lowering costs and fixing the system. But if you were waiting for a detailed, comprehensive health care plan, you know, the kind with numbers, timelines, and actual legislative mechanics, you may still be waiting. A health care plan released along the same timeline as Trump's tax returns to be released from that audit. Because what we heard sounded less like a fully built policy and more like the trailer for something that may or may not be coming soon to a Congress near you. Health plan? What plan? Oh, that's right. It was a concept of a plan. Then we moved into the now familiar promise to crack down on fraud, waste, and abuse. Specifically Minnesota, but basically everywhere. And listen, every administration says this. Every president, red or blue, gets up there, vows to hunt down fraud like it's the last season of a true crime podcast. But here's where the moment took on a little extra irony. Donald Trump, standing at that podium, talking about going after fraud, is for a lot of Americans a bit like putting a man accused of financial scams in charge of the financial books after hours. Trump is a man whose critics have spent years accusing him and his family of monetizing everything in sight, licensing his name, selling his brand, and always making sure the money flows in the Trump's direction. Donald Trump is not talking about fraud from the cheap seats. This is a president whose name, brand, and family business machine have generated billions of dollars over the years, and whose visibility only gets more valuable with the full power of the presidency behind it. The Trump operation has always been about monetizing the spotlight, and the presidency is the biggest spotlight on the planet. So when Trump stands there selling himself as America's top fraud fighter, a whole lot of Americans are looking at their television and laughing out loud. Now, to be fair, if there's fraud in government programs, absolutely go after it. Nobody is defending a waste or abuse in our country. But the political theater here is hard to miss. The man many opponents view as the ultimate salesman of the Trump brand is now presenting himself as the country's chief anti-fraud crusader. That's not just policy. That's management in prime time. The challenge, of course, is that fraud in large federal systems is incredibly complex, incredibly technical, and incredibly hard to eliminate with broad applause lines. So yes, the pledge was there. The question is always what actually changes on the ground versus what sounds good in primetime. At one point during the State of the Union, the president declared that he had ended 8 wars. 8. And the reaction inside that chamber told you everything you needed to know. Democrats were laughing out loud when Trump said that. 8 wars. Because that claim was pure, full-blown, egotistical nonsense. Trump did not end 8 wars. You can't stand at a podium, wave your hand, and declare global conflicts finished like you're closing a tab on your laptop. And then Trump actually started naming the conflicts he says he ended, which only made the moment more surreal. Because wars do not end because one politician says they're ended. They end through negotiated settlements, verified withdrawals, signed agreements, and long, messy geopolitical work. Standing there and announcing 8 victories does not make it reality. It just makes the claim sound even more detached from the world people are actually watching. And here's the part that really makes your head snap back. The same guy, Trump, who just stood there bragging about ending 8 wars, is now talking tough on Iran, while U.S. carriers are already sitting in that region. You can't puff out your chest, Donald, about being the great peacemaker, and then in the next breath, start sounding like you're warming up the runway for the next conflict. Because people aren't stupid. They hear the words, they see the ships, and they can do the math. If you, Donald the delusional one, truly ended 8 wars, maybe the focus should be on keeping tensions down, not cranking up the volume with Iran while the hardware is already in position. And then there was the moment inside the chamber that political watchers immediately zeroed in on, when some Democrats chose not to stand during portions of Trump's speech. The president noticed, and he pounced. Now, to be fair, the Democrats put themselves in that position. There was visible frustration, a few pointed remarks, and the temperature in the room ticked up several degrees. Now, here's the strategic reality. Moments like that play very differently depending on which side of the aisle you're on. Supporters see strength. Critics see unnecessary escalation. But what was unmistakable in that the speech did not just stay in policy territory, it drifted back into that familiar campaign-style confrontation that keeps the political base energized but does very little to cool the national temperature. What Trump did do, and did repeatedly, was maintain a steady, controlled delivery. For those of us that were expecting a rambling or unfocused performance, that didn't materialize. The speech was long, yes, very long. But it was largely structured and teleprompter tight. And then we got the medal parade. One after another, hero after hero, brought into the spotlight by Donald. Now let me say this so nobody twists my words. These were real heroes. They deserved that respect. They earned their moment. But the way Trump rolled it out last night, come on. It started to feel like Oprah handing out cars. You get a medal. You get a medal. Everybody in the room gets a medal. It was so rapid fire, so stacked, that after a while you could feel what was happening. The room was being managed. Because when your poll numbers are sagging like Trump's, and the country's still uneasy about where things are headed, flooding the screen with emotional moments is a pretty reliable play. It changes the mood. It softens the coverage. It gets people talking about the feel-good moments instead of the harder questions sitting underneath this administration right now. Again, the people being honored earned every bit of that recognition. That's not the issue. The issue is how it was used. Last night it didn't feel natural. It felt produced. It felt timed. It felt very much like Trump trying to change the subject. Because when you strip away the applause lines and the standing ovations, what we heard last night was Donald Trump insisting the country's already living in the golden age. Everything's perfect. Prices are low. Paychecks are fat. America's supposedly humming along like a brand new engine. But that's not the reality of millions of people living in it. What came through that chamber last night, not just from Trump, but from the Republicans lined up behind him, from J.D. Vance to Mike Johnson, was a very clear message. We're in control. We say everything's great in America. What exactly are you going to do about it? Get out of our frigging way, or we will run you over. There was a disdain from Trump and the Republicans. There was a cold callousness from them in that room last night. And that's the disconnect sitting right at the center of Trump's speech. Because you could declare a golden age from a podium all night long. You can stack the medals. You can stretch a speech to nearly 2 hours. You can pile bullshit on top of bullshit. But the biggest question still hanging in the air is a simple one. If everything's so fantastic, according to Trump, why don't more Americans actually feel it? And to borrow from what Governor Spanberger said in her rebuttal to Trump last night, ask yourself one simple question. Is Donald Trump working for you? And we all know the answer. That's a big, fat no. We have a dictatorship right now in the White House, plain and simple. You can call it what you want. I call it fascism. And a few of you, the listeners, agree with me, then please become a member of Wolf. There are no dues. It takes less than a minute to become a founding member. If this is your belief about Donald Trump and the Republicans, you have zero excuse not to join Wolf, the organization. Joinwolf.org. That's what you put in your browser. You joining something collectively with others like yourself, that makes a huge difference. All our voices together take this country in a different direction. Type in joinwolf.org and you'll learn more about it. This will take you directly to more information, and then you can make a decision if you'd like to sign up. This is separate from the podcast. This is completely different from the Wolf Pack of the podcast. Some of you may already be a member of. If you have any questions about Wolf, the organization, email me. Don't say, great job, Jeff. Don't pat me on the back. Don't send me an emoji. Joinwolf.org. I truly expect that all of you who are listening to have already done that. I'll be back again Friday. I pride myself in doing this podcast without bullshit, without fake anger, without phony headlines like a lot of the other podcasts do. I sincerely hope that's appreciated. I'm Jeff Allen Wolf. This is A World Gone Mad. Wolfpack listeners, at a time when truth is getting buried under lies and too many of the wrong voices are telling you what to think, it's time to take a stand. Be skeptical. Question everything. Don't lose hope. And most of all, stay alert.